She threw hot coffee in anger, never knowing the same moment would lead to her deathbed, giving birth to triplets of the most powerful CEO in the city when he walked in. Everyone froze. No one knew he was her secret husband, and what he did next made the whole world cry. Welcome back to Beyond Color Stories, where love conquers pain and hearts that were once broken find their forever home. Before we dive in, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from today? Don't blink, because today's story is one you'll never forget, a story of a kind black woman betrayed by her stepmom and the billionaire CEO who risked everything to bring her back to life. Make sure you watch till the end, and please hit that subscribe button, give this story a big thumbs up, and let's dive right into it. Elena's hands trembled violently as Vivian's sharp words cut through the quiet hum of the cafe like a blade, echoing in her ears with relentless cruelty. "You're nothing, a worthless mistake, and you'll never be anything." The words didn't just sting, they burned, leaving an invisible scorch across her chest that made her lungs tighten and her heart pound like a war drum, threatening to explode in the small, cramped space surrounded by curious and shocked patrons. The cafe's chatter faltered, forks paused mid-air, and coffee machines hissed, as if even the inanimate objects were holding their breath, sensing the storm that was about to erupt. Elena's eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and defiance, fixed on Vivian, whose smirk was a dagger, a polished weapon aimed squarely at her heart, mocking everything she had tried to hold together in her shattered life. Her fingers clenched around the ceramic cup she held, feeling the heat sear into her palm as though it were a living extension of her rage. And before rational thought could intervene, before logic could whisper a warning about consequences, the steam from the coffee swirled around her like a prelude to chaos. She hurled the cup with a force born from years of silent torment, years of bearing Vivian's cutting words in silence, each ounce of anger propelling it across the space until it splattered against Vivian's tailored blouse, a shocking arc of rebellion that stunned every patron into a frozen tableau. Vivian's scream was shrill, sharp, piercing through the tense air, drawing every eye toward the epicenter of humiliation, her face now a portrait of rage and disbelief, while the dark liquid ran down her front like a tangible symbol of her momentary defeat, the cafe suddenly alive with whispers and gasps. Elena's chest heaved as adrenaline surged, her knees threatening to buckle under the weight of the audacity of her own action. And yet she felt no relief, only the raw, electric charge of confrontation hanging in the air, crackling like lightning before a storm. Just as Vivian moved to retaliate, her hand raised with venomous intent, the cafe door burst open with a slam so forceful that every head snapped toward the entrance, every eye straining to see who dared enter such a scene. There, framed in the sunlight that streaked across the polished floors, was a man whose presence demanded obedience, respect, and fear simultaneously, a figure of immense power whose gaze alone could shatter the bravest of souls. Chris Jordan, the city's most feared and respected CEO, tall, broad-shouldered, exuding authority and danger like a living storm. His eyes, darker than thunderclouds on a winter night, fixed on Vivian with a lethal intensity, and the muscles in his jaw clenched as he moved with predatory precision across the cafe, his steps silent but heavy with impending consequence. With a single swift motion, he seized Vivian's wrist, stopping her hand mere inches from Elena's face, the sudden force leaving Vivian frozen, eyes wide with disbelief and fear as the realization struck her. She had crossed a line even she did not dare imagine. The cafe held its collective breath, every person caught between curiosity and terror, watching the drama unfold as Elena's heart raced uncontrollably, every beat echoing like a warning that something monumental had just begun. Chris's gaze, sharp and unforgiving, softened only when it landed on Elena, and a warmth flickered briefly behind the storm of his eyes, confusing the onlookers, who could not understand why the most untouchable man in the city would show such tenderness toward the trembling young woman before him. Vivian's face drained of color, her arrogance crumbling under the weight of Chris's presence, a stammer escaping her lips. "Chris, you?" The syllables sounded fragile, nearly breaking under the strain of shock and fear, as if her very voice feared the power radiating from him. The silence that followed was thick, almost tangible, as if the air itself had frozen in place, holding its breath for the next act, the tension pressing down on every person in the cafe with an almost suffocating weight. Chris's next words cut through the silence like a sharpened sword, deliberate, final, leaving no room for argument or escape. "Touch my wife again, and I'll destroy everything you own." The words were not a threat, they were an absolute promise, imbued with a chilling certainty that made every onlooker shiver in anticipation of the consequences. The cafe seemed to shrink under the force of his voice, every whisper and clink of cutlery swallowed by the gravity of his command, as the atmosphere shifted from chaos to a tense, electrified stillness. Elena's knees weakened beneath her, the shock of the moment, the weight of Vivian's cruelty, and the inexplicable intervention of Chris coalescing into a dizzying storm that left her vision spinning. Her heart pounded erratically, each beat threatening to tear itself from her chest, and a wave of vertigo swept over her, dragging her toward the edge of consciousness. The whispers around her became distant echoes, the shocked gasps fading into a muffled hum, as if the world had narrowed to the space between Chris's hand on Vivian's wrist and the trembling figure of Elena. Then her body betrayed her entirely. Her legs gave way, her vision blurred into darkness at the edges, and she crumpled to the floor, the sensation of falling both terrifying and strangely liberating. The cafe erupted into chaos as chairs scraped against tiles, cups rattled on tables, and patrons leapt forward instinctively, unsure whether to help or flee. The tension now thick enough to taste, metallic and electric on everyone's tongue. Chris's head snapped toward her as she fell, his eyes widening just slightly, the storm behind them momentarily shifting into concern, though it was quickly masked by the armor of his usual intensity. Vivian, too stunned to move, stared down at Elena's prone form, her previous fury replaced by a flicker of fear that her own actions had consequences far beyond what she could control. Every second stretched into eternity, each heartbeat loud in the deafening silence that followed her collapse. As if the cafe itself had paused to witness the fallout, Chris knelt beside Elena in a blur of efficiency and authority, one arm steadying her trembling form, his touch firm yet careful, the other scanning the room with a predator's vigilance, silently daring anyone to step out of line. The murmur of patrons became a distant background noise as Chris focused entirely on Elena, his presence a protective barrier between her and the chaos, between her and Vivian, between her and the world that had always seemed intent on breaking her. His voice, when it finally came, was low and commanding, reverberating through the tense air. "Stay with me." The words were simple but layered with meaning. A promise of protection, a warning to anyone foolish enough to cross him, and a comfort to the young woman who had just faced the sharp edge of humiliation and fear. Elena's fingers twitched in his hand, her eyelids fluttering weakly as consciousness wavered, caught between fear and the strange, overwhelming relief of being defended by someone so untouchably powerful. The cafe seemed suspended in a liminal space, caught between the horror of what had just happened and the anticipation of what was coming, every patron unable to look away, each breath held in silent suspense. Vivian's mouth opened, then closed again, words failing her entirely as she realized that her dominance, her cruel authority, her arrogance, all of it had been shattered in an instant by one man's arrival and one word: wife. Confusion, fear, and an unfamiliar trembling overtook her, as if she were finally tasting a fragment of the terror and vulnerability she had imposed on Elena countless times before. The coffee-stained blouse, the shards of porcelain on the floor, the stunned silence. All of it became a tableau of her own undoing, a moment she could never erase, a moment that would haunt her in ways she could not yet comprehend. Chris's eyes never left Elena's face, scanning for any sign of injury, any flicker of weakness, while simultaneously holding Vivian's gaze with an unyielding intensity that seemed to strip her bare, leaving nothing but the raw truth of her defeat exposed for everyone in the room. Patrons whispered behind hands, phones lifted to record the scene, but all noise became secondary to the undeniable drama unfolding, a real-life tempest of emotion, power, and fragile humanity. Elena's breathing was shallow, each inhale a laborious effort, yet she could sense the iron-sharp edge of Chris's focus, the magnetic pull of his presence, a tether anchoring her to the world, keeping her from being swallowed entirely by panic or faintness. Then, just as her vision threatened to darken completely, Chris's hand tightened slightly, grounding her, his low murmur threading through the tension like a lifeline. "Not yet. Stay with me, Elena." The words, so gentle yet commanding, were enough to keep the edges of her awareness intact, a thin thread connecting her to life, to safety, to something greater than the fear and pain she had endured. The cafe seemed suspended in a moment of impossible intensity, every second stretching, every breath counted, as if the universe itself had paused to observe the intersection of fate, fury, and love that had collided so violently in this small space. Vivian's lips quivered, her previous confidence shattered, the icy mask she wore slipping to reveal raw, unguarded fear for the first time in years, and every patron sensed the dangerous shift, the quiet warning that power had changed hands, and someone previously untouchable now stood utterly exposed. Elena's knees pressed against the cold tiles, her body trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline and fear, and in that moment, she understood, with terrifying clarity, that life as she knew it had just shifted forever. The collision of past cruelty, present danger, and unforeseen protection had created a turning point, one that could never be reversed, a chapter that would mark the beginning of something monumental. And as her eyelids finally closed, the cafe fading into a blur, her last conscious thought was a mixture of terror, disbelief, and a fragile, pulsing hope, the hope that she was no longer entirely alone. Elena's eyelids fluttered open to a blinding light that stabbed her vision, forcing her to squint, and a sterile, biting scent of antiseptic filled her nostrils, mingling with the faint metallic tang of blood and the sharp chemical smell of hospital disinfectants, leaving her senses reeling as her weak body trembled under the weight of pain and exhaustion. The rhythmic beeping of monitors filled the air around her, each pulse a reminder of the fragile balance between life and death, and the sudden heaviness in her stomach sent waves of terror through her, making her gasp for air, only to realize with a jolt of panic that her water had broken far too early. Her breaths came shallow and ragged, and each contraction shot through her like knives, making her vision blur at the edges, while beads of sweat dotted her forehead, slipping into her eyes, stinging as they fell onto the crisp, white sheets beneath her. Panic clawed at her chest, sharp and relentless, as the realization struck her. She was in labor, and it was dangerous, far more dangerous than she had ever imagined, with triplets inside her fragile body, their tiny lives hanging on a thread that seemed thinner than gossamer. Through the haze of pain, her vision focused on Vivian, who stood frozen near the door, her usual arrogance and cruelty replaced by something utterly unfamiliar, shock, terror and disbelief that her stepdaughter, the girl she had always mocked, was the center of a life-and-death drama she had never anticipated. Chris's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding, like a whip cracking in the silent tension as he barked orders to the nurses and doctors who had gathered around the flustered scene. "Get her onto the operating table now. Prepare for an emergency cesarean. We can't lose her, not like this." His tone left no room for hesitation, each word imbued with an urgency that forced every medical professional to spring into action immediately, as if they were suddenly puppets pulled by the absolute will of the man before them. Vivian stumbled backward, unable to process the words that ripped through her, her lips trembling as she whispered, Your children." The reality of Chris's claim hit her like a thunderclap, shattering the arrogant, untouchable world she had built around herself. Her eyes widened as she realized that Elena, the girl she had always humiliated, was carrying the future heirs of one of the most powerful men in the city, and her mind raced, unable to reconcile the humiliation, the shock, and the impossible truth she now faced. Nurses and doctors moved around Elena with lightning speed, checking vitals, preparing IV lines, sterilizing instruments, and monitoring the fragile condition of the babies, each action a calculated attempt to control the chaos that threatened to overwhelm the room. Chris never left her side, kneeling beside the bed, his large, steady hands gripping hers with an intensity that was almost painful in its strength, grounding her trembling form as he whispered words that were both command and comfort. "You're not alone, Elena. I'm right here. Fight for us." His tears fell unbidden onto her knuckles, warm and wet, mingling with her own sweat, each drop a silent testament to the depth of his emotion, the intensity of his fear, and the boundless love that surged through him as he faced the possibility of losing the woman he cherished. Elena's cries echoed through the hall, sharp and piercing, each one a desperate plea for relief, for safety, for life, and the sound reverberated against the sterile walls, creating a symphony of human vulnerability that seemed almost unbearable in its intensity. She gasped for air between contractions, each inhale shallow, each exhale a moan that carried both pain and determination, her body convulsing with the effort of bringing life into the world under circumstances that were far from ideal. Chris's grip never faltered, his thumb brushing over her dampened knuckles in a rhythmic motion that offered the slightest hint of comfort amidst the storm, his whispers threading through the chaos like a lifeline. "You're strong, Elena. You can do this. Fight. Just a little longer." Vivian watched from the sidelines, frozen and trembling, unable to move closer, her arrogance stripped away as she witnessed the raw, primal struggle between life and death unfolding before her eyes. The monitors beeped in erratic patterns, each tone setting her heart racing anew, each blip a reminder of the precarious balance holding Elena and her unborn children together. Sweat matted her hair to her forehead, and her chest heaved with the effort, yet her eyes, when they dared to open, met Chris's gaze with a flicker of determination, a spark of life that refused to surrender, even as exhaustion and fear threatened to claim her entirely. The air was thick with tension, every sound amplified. The shuffle of nurses' shoes, the clink of metal instruments, the whispers of orders, the occasional gasp of onlookers, and the continuous, relentless beeping of monitors that tracked the fragile rhythm of multiple heartbeats. Suddenly, one monitor flatlined, sending a jolt of terror through the room as the alarms blared in a shrill, ear-piercing cacophony that drowned out everything else. Doctors shouted instructions, nurses scrambled, and chaos erupted. Yet Chris's focus never wavered, his hands tightening around Elena's, his voice cutting through the noise like steel. "Fight, Elena! You can't leave us now!" His eyes, dark and stormy, glimmered with tears as he hovered over her, refusing to let go even for a second, refusing to allow fear or death to claim her. Elena, despite the searing pain, the fear, and the exhaustion, found a spark of courage, driven by the sheer intensity of his presence, the knowledge that she was not alone, that someone who loved her more than life itself was fighting alongside her, willing her to survive. Vivian's hands flew to her mouth, her previous confidence shattered as she realized that the woman she had mocked, humiliated and underestimated was now the center of a battle she had no power to influence. The air was electric, charged with desperation, love, fear, and anticipation. Every person in the room acutely aware that this was a turning point, a moment that could redefine everything for everyone involved. Elena's body convulsed again with a particularly violent contraction, her back arching, her nails digging into Chris's palms as she bit down on the pain, refusing to scream, yet unable to hold back entirely. Each heartbeat felt monumental, every second stretched beyond measure as the team worked tirelessly, their movements precise, practiced, yet frantic under the pressure, their eyes flicking constantly between the monitors and the fragile young woman before them. Chris's lips brushed her temple in a fleeting, protective gesture, his forehead pressed to the side of her head, whispering, "Stay with me, Elena. Fight for us. I won't let you go." His voice trembled slightly with emotion, raw and unguarded, and it was enough to anchor her through another unbearable wave of pain. The monitors beeped in rapid succession, alarms shrilling in chaotic crescendos, yet Chris remained unflinching, issuing rapid commands with a voice sharpened by fear and love, ensuring that every doctor, nurse, and assistant was perfectly synchronized in the life-saving dance unfolding before them. Elena's vision blurred, sweat stung her eyes, and exhaustion threatened to claim her consciousness entirely. But Chris's unwavering presence, the weight of his hand holding hers, the warmth of his whispered words, anchored her to the moment, keeping her tethered to life as if sheer force of will alone could protect her. Vivian stumbled closer, helpless and horrified, unable to comprehend how her life had intersected with Elena's in such a profound, irreversible way, every instinct telling her to intervene, yet every rational thought paralyzed by the enormity of the scene before her. Another alarm blared, sharper this time, and Chris's hands tightened around hers, fingers digging into her trembling knuckles, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Not yet! Don't you dare leave me fight for us! Fight for them!" The urgency and love behind his words were almost tangible, thickening the air, making every breath they drew together a lifeline in the storm. Elena gritted her teeth, another contraction racking her body, and yet somehow she summoned a strength she did not know she possessed, a spark of defiance, a refusal to let the world, or fate, take her from the man whose love now surrounded her like armor. Nurses moved with heightened urgency, adjusting monitors, readying instruments, counting seconds, communicating in clipped professional bursts, each aware that every decision they made could tip the scales between survival and tragedy. Vivian's face was pale, her usual poise shattered, and yet her eyes remained fixed on the drama, unable to look away, each moment carving into her a lesson in humility, in the destructive power of cruelty, and the unassailable strength of a mother fighting for her children. Chris whispered again, a hushed, desperate mantra. "You're mine, not a step away, not a breath away. You stay with me." The words were fierce and tender all at once, a declaration of love, a vow, and a challenge to anyone or anything that might try to take her from him. As another wave of pain struck, Elena closed her eyes, focusing on his presence, on the warmth of his hand, the intensity of his gaze, and the unspoken promise that she was not alone, and that together they could face the storm. No matter how fierce the alarms continued to shriek, the chaos intensified, and the room became a living, breathing entity of tension. Yet Chris never let go, his unwavering determination, love, and sheer will, a shield against despair. Every second became an eternity, each moment suspended between fear and hope, as Elena, Chris, and everyone in the room braced for what might come next, knowing that this night would define everything, and that the outcome could alter their lives forever. The operation lights glowed overhead, harsh and blinding, casting stark, clinical shadows across the sterile walls of the emergency ward, illuminating every bead of sweat on Elena's pale, exhausted face. and reflecting in the tear-filled eyes of Chris, who refused to release her trembling hand, as if letting go even for a second could shatter the fragile tether keeping her alive. Every tick of the clock seemed like a hammer pounding against the chest of everyone present, stretching hours into lifetimes as the sterile smell of antiseptic and the metallic scent of blood mingled in the air, creating a suffocating intensity that made it difficult to breathe, as if the very atmosphere had been electrified by fear and hope colliding in equal measure. Nurses and doctors moved in a synchronized frenzy, voices clipped with urgency, instruments glinting under the bright lights, the rhythmic beeping of monitors providing an unrelenting reminder of Elena's delicate condition, while the triplets' tiny lives hung in the balance with each passing second, so fragile that a single misstep could change everything. Chris's jaw was clenched, knuckles white as he gripped her hand with a strength fueled by terror and love, his eyes dark and stormy as he refused to blink, refused to allow the reality of what was happening to escape him. Each silent second waited with the possibility of irreversible loss. "Stay with me, Elena. Just a little longer," he whispered, his lips brushing her damp hair, voice trembling with raw desperation, even as machines screamed their mechanical urgency and alarms blared like sirens in a city of suffering. Elena's lips parted in a weak, trembling sigh, a mix of pain and determination etched across her face, the sweat on her brow streaked with tears as her body convulsed in response to another contraction, each one sharper, more excruciating than the last, and yet she fought for life, for the babies, for the man who refused to leave her side. Vivian's hands clutched at her chest, eyes wide with disbelief, as she watched the woman she had tormented for years endure unimaginable pain, survive impossible odds, and rise above fear in ways she had never imagined, her arrogance crumbling like fragile porcelain under the sheer force of the moment. The first cry cut through the sterile air, sharp, piercing, a newborn wail that sliced through tension like a knife, and Chris's heart seemed to stop as he stared in disbelief, the sound of life so small yet monumental, an affirmation that the battle had begun to tilt in their favor. He leaned forward, holding his breath as the nurses placed the first tiny form in swaddling blankets, the infant's delicate chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm, and a sob escaped his lips, unrestrained, raw with a mixture of awe, love, and relief. And then the second cry followed, louder, more insistent, as another tiny life demanded its place in the world, each wail an explosion of miraculous existence that echoed in the hearts of everyone present. And Chris dropped to his knees, hands clenching the edge of the operating table as tears streamed freely down his face. "My sons, and my daughter," he whispered, voice trembling, as disbelief and overwhelming emotion collided in a storm of sensation that left him gasping, unable to articulate the depth of his relief and astonishment. Vivian staggered back, clutching her chest as if the knowledge of what had just happened might physically crush her. Her eyes wide in horror as she realized that the woman she had scorned, belittled, and humiliated for so long had delivered the heirs to the Jordan Empire, a truth she had never imagined would be revealed in her lifetime. The third cry rang out, a small, insistent wail that completed the trio, the tiny, fragile lives of the triplets affirming their place in the world, and Chris pressed his forehead to the cold floor beside the table, overcome by a tidal wave of emotions so intense he could barely breathe. Nurses handed him the tiny bundles, their delicate forms wriggling slightly, and he cradled them with a reverence reserved for the most sacred of treasures, his lips brushing each forehead, murmuring soft promises and prayers he had never known he would speak aloud, as though his love alone could shield them from every danger in the world. Elena's eyelids fluttered open, her face pale, lips trembling in exhaustion. But when she met Chris's gaze, a faint smile appeared, fragile yet radiant, a testament to her endurance, and in that weak, fleeting moment, She whispered his name, her voice almost lost amidst the chaos, but enough to make him shiver with love and relief. Chris leaned down, kissing her forehead with an intensity born of love, desperation, and gratitude, whispering, "You did it, my love. You've done the impossible. You're safe now. We're all safe." His voice cracked under the weight of the emotion, thick with unshed tears and the sheer enormity of what they had survived together, while Elena's lips quivered in a tired, weary smile, her eyes shining with a mixture of pain, pride, and affection. But before Chris could exhale, before he could allow himself a moment of relief, the monitors shrieked with urgent alarms, the red lights flashing in a terrifying rhythm, each tone stabbing through the room like the harbinger of disaster, and Chris froze, horror gripping him like ice. "No, not now," he whispered, panic edging his voice as he scanned the monitors, every instinct screaming that something was terribly wrong, something still hung in the balance, threatening to steal everything they had fought for. Elena's blood pressure plummeted with terrifying speed, and the room erupted into action once more, doctors shouting instructions, nurses rushing to adjust lines and oxygen, the chaos a frenzied storm of life and death urgency that left every observer breathless. Chris's hands tightened around hers, his knuckles white with fear and refusal, his voice a trembling anchor in the storm. "You can't leave me, Elena. Fight! Fight for them! Fight for us!" He refused to let go, refused to allow despair to touch her, and in that moment the room's chaos faded, leaving only the fragile thread of life connecting him to her, the tenuous balance that now defined the entire world. Vivian's face was ghostly, drained of all color, her arrogance obliterated as she realized the depth of what she had witnessed, the fragile miracle of survival, and the utter helplessness she felt in the face of Chris's love and determination. The baby's tiny cries were swallowed by the alarms, yet each wail was a testament to resilience, a spark of life in a room consumed by tension. And Chris whispered to each one soft promises and vows, praying they would endure as fiercely as their mother. Elena's weak hands tried to grasp his, her energy nearly spent. Yet the faint squeeze that met his own was enough to ignite hope in his chest, to tell him that she had not given up, that she was still fighting, still here, still alive. The doctors called for oxygen, adjusted monitors, administered medications, and moved with synchronized precision, the dance of medical skill now a high-stakes ballet against time, their every action weighted with consequence, every decision a potential pivot between life and death. Chris's voice never wavered, never faltered, each whisper a tether to reality and love, his eyes never leaving hers, even as the alarms blared louder, the machines turned red, and every second became a knife edge of suspense. The tension wrapped the room in suffocating layers, every breath, every heartbeat, every shallow sigh of Elena and the triplets magnified by the storm of danger surrounding them, creating a charged atmosphere thick with fear, hope, and unbreakable resolve. And as the seconds stretched, heavy and endless, Chris pressed his forehead to hers once more, murmuring, "I won't leave you. Not for a second. Stay with me. You're not alone. Fight, fight for all of us." Elena's eyes, though clouded with pain, met his with a spark of determination, a promise that she would not yield, and the tiniest squeeze of her hand reminded him that miracles, however fragile, were still possible. The monitors beeped erratically, the alarms blared incessantly, and the medical team worked tirelessly, each movement precise yet urgent, each second loaded with consequence, as Chris whispered ceaselessly words of love, courage, and prayer, holding on to the fragile thread that bound them together. Vivian's knees buckled slightly, her previous dominance completely stripped away as she realized the sheer depth of what she had underestimated, and she watched helplessly as the woman she had mocked fought for her life and the lives of 3 precious children, with the man she had underestimated standing like an unbreakable shield beside her. Every second that passed felt eternal, each contraction, each beep, each cry of the newborn stretching time itself, while Chris's hands never left hers, his whispers never ceasing, and his presence became a lighthouse, guiding Elena through the storm of pain and terror. The beeping escalated, the red warning screamed urgency, and the possibility of loss hovered like a dark shadow. Yet the room was a crucible of willpower, determination, and unshakable love, with Chris and Elena at its center, refusing to yield to fear. And then, just as hope seemed to flicker against despair, another contraction hit, sharper than any before, yet Elena's trembling body met it with the tiniest flicker of resistance, a fragile spark igniting in the storm, while Chris murmured, "You can do this, fight for us, for them, for our life together." Every person in the room held their breath. The world narrowed to the fragile thread of survival, and the tension mounted to an unbearable apex as the alarms continued to scream and the fate of mother and children hung on the knife edge of eternity. The red lights of the monitors still pulsed ominously, painting the hospital room in a harsh, alarming glow as Chris sat frozen beside Elena, his hands clutching hers so tightly that his knuckles were white, his eyes shadowed with sleepless exhaustion and raw, unrelenting fear. The operation room had cleared of most personnel, leaving only a skeleton crew of doctors and nurses who whispered instructions in hurried, cautious tones, their movements precise but tense, all acutely aware of the fragile lives lying before them. Elena's form was limp beneath the crisp white sheets, her chest rising and falling in shallow, irregular rhythms, the triplets swaddled in tiny blankets at the foot of her bed, each one a miracle wrapped in vulnerability. Chris refused to move an inch, his massive frame hunched over her, his head occasionally brushing her temple, his lips murmuring soft, desperate prayers that barely reached the ears of anyone else in the room but seemed to echo endlessly in his own heart. "You promised to fight, Elena. You promised," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, a trembling mixture of command, plea, and uncontainable love, as tears carved clean paths down his cheeks, soaking into the sleeves of his designer suit, the expensive fabric irrelevant in this moment of raw humanity. Hours dragged on, the fluorescent lights above flickering slightly, each passing minute a torment, each second a battle against the invisible threat that loomed over her fragile form. Nurses monitored the lines, adjusted oxygen levels, checked blood pressure, and whispered among themselves in low tones, while Chris's gaze never wavered, following every twitch, every faint breath, every heartbeat as if memorizing the fragile dance of life itself. Doctors approached him cautiously, a folder of forms in hand, their voices tinged with sympathy and professional detachment. "Mr. Jordan, we need your signature to proceed. She's not responding. She may not make it without consent for advanced interventions." Chris's eyes snapped open, flames of defiance and terror igniting within their depths. With a roar that silenced the murmurs, he tore the paper to shreds, scattering fragments across the sterile floor. "She's not leaving me," he growled, each word soaked in unrelenting determination. "Not today. Not now. She stays with me, alive, no matter what." The medical team froze, stunned by the sheer force of his will, yet their professionalism compelled them to continue, guided now by the man whose authority outweighed protocols, whose desperation carried the weight of life itself. Hours turned into an eternity as Chris contacted every top surgeon in the country, summoning expertise, calling in specialists, ensuring that the woman he loved and the children they had just brought into the world had the very best chance of survival. The hospital buzzed with quiet intensity, whispers of awe and disbelief following Chris as he moved like a storm, giving orders, questioning every minute detail, inspecting every monitor, every drip, every medical instrument, refusing to leave Elena's side for even a heartbeat. Vivian hovered behind the glass of the observation area. Mascara streaked down her cheeks, her once proud posture crumpled under the weight of guilt, horror, and helplessness. "What have I done?" she whispered. voice choked with regret as she realized that every cruel word, every mockery, every act of disdain she had poured upon Elena had been meaningless in the face of the truth. Elena's strength, Elena's resilience, and the overwhelming love that Chris displayed so openly, so fiercely. Even as Elena lay unconscious, her body pale and fragile, Chris's presence radiated a power far greater than any boardroom, any corporate strategy. He was unrelenting, impenetrable, and utterly devoted, a human fortress protecting everything he held dear. The alarms continued their insistent shriek, beeping with erratic rhythm as if mocking the helplessness of the human heart against the merciless clock of fate, and yet Chris did not flinch. His hands steady, his words soft but firm, his murmurs never ceasing. "Stay with me, please. You're not leaving me, Elena. Not now. Not ever." He brushed damp hair from her forehead, kissed her temple, whispered secrets of love and promises of a future she could not yet respond to, yet his voice carried the conviction of someone who would move heaven and earth to keep her alive. Time became a distorted, elastic concept, stretching endlessly as the hospital staff worked tirelessly, adjusting drips, monitoring vitals, preparing interventions, and watching in awe as Chris remained a constant presence, a human anchor tethering life itself to hope Vivian could do nothing but watch. Her breath shallow, each tear falling onto the glass like a confession of her lifetime of cruelty, and yet she could not intervene, could not penetrate the wall of love, desperation, and willpower that Chris had erected around Elena. Slowly, ever so slowly, after hours that felt like decades, a faint flutter returned to Elena's heartbeat, a fragile, fragile spark of life that sent a ripple of hope through the room. Chris froze. Every muscle tense, every breath held, every ounce of fear and relief coiled together in one intense moment as he watched the monitor stabilize, the beeping settle into a rhythm that suggested, just barely, that she was fighting, that she was not yet gone. His body slumped beside her bed, hands still entwined with hers, tears dripping freely onto the cold sheets, whispering, "You're mine, Elena. No one takes you from me. Not today. Not ever." His lips brushed hers gently, almost reverent, as if the touch itself might anchor her spirit back to life, and for the first time in hours he allowed himself a trembling exhale, the tension in his shoulders loosening fractionally, though his eyes never left her face. The early dawn began to cast a soft glow through the blinds, pale and fragile, brushing across the white sheets and reflecting off the tears on Chris's cheeks, painting the room in golden light that felt almost too gentle for the storm that had raged within it. Then, as if fate itself refused to grant a full reprieve, the door to the ICU creaked open and a man stepped into the room, holding a folder with the clinical coldness of someone delivering a verdict. Chris turned slowly, every fiber of his being tensing as the stranger approached, and Vivian instinctively shrank back, realizing that this could be the final challenge, the last cruel trick in the chain of events designed to test them. The man's eyes met Chris's, expression unreadable, and he extended the folder with deliberate care, a DNA report clutched tightly in one hand, the paper crinkling slightly, as if echoing the weight of the truth contained within Chris's hands, tightened on Elena's once more, his gaze hardening, his jaw clenched as he reached for the report, every muscle coiled with anticipation, dread, and a cold fury. As he opened the folder, scanning the numbers and data that confirmed what Vivian had plotted in secret, his expression flickered, shifting from horror to disbelief to a burning, unreadable determination, and the room seemed to contract around him, the very air charged with the electricity of revelation. Vivian's mouth opened in a silent scream. realization dawning that even her final, calculated attempt at cruelty might be about to backfire catastrophically. Yet she could do nothing as Chris's eyes glimmered with the intensity of someone who had faced death and survived, yet now faced a new, staggering truth that threatened to shake the foundations of everything. Time seemed to stand still as Chris closed the folder, his breathing deep and deliberate, his lips pressing briefly to Elena's cold hand. And then he straightened, towering, unyielding, a force that even Vivian could not penetrate. The DNA report lay on the bed beside him, a silent, potent testament to the complexities of love, betrayal, and family. And as Chris turned to Vivian, his eyes burned with an intensity that promised retribution, protection, and the unshakable power of a man who would never, ever let go of what was his. And for a fleeting, horrifying moment, everyone in the room realized that whatever the results revealed, the consequences would ripple far beyond the sterile walls of the hospital, reaching into every corner of their lives, changing allegiances, hearts, and the very structure of power, leaving nothing untouched. The triplets stirred slightly, tiny cries muffled by the machines, and Chris leaned over them, brushing his fingers across their soft heads, whispering protective words, while his gaze never left Vivian or the man at the door, each glance a quiet, deadly warning. Any attempt to harm, manipulate, or interfere would be met with the full force of his resolve. And in that moment, the hospital room was no longer merely a space for healing. It became the epicenter of a battle waged with love, power, and secrets. A crucible that would forge the unbreakable bond between Chris and Elena and set the stage for revelations that could shake the very foundation of their world. The air in the hospital room felt heavier than ever, dense with tension and unspoken truths, as Chris stood over the DNA report, the paper crinkling faintly under his grip, the sterile lights reflecting off his hard, calculating eyes that had just absorbed a revelation so potent it could reshape their entire world. Vivian's voice trembled, quivering on the edge of hysteria, fragile yet shrill, cutting through the low hum of the machines. "You see, Chris? She trapped you." The words dripped with accusation, venom thinly veiled as triumph, but her tone faltered as the smirk curled on Chris's lips, cold and unreadable, his gaze sharpening like a blade, and he let the report slip from his hands, dropping to the floor with a muted thud that seemed to echo through every corner of the room. He bent, picked up the paper, glanced at it once more, and then, in one deliberate motion, cast it aside, letting it flutter like a meaningless scrap, though every eye in the room knew it was anything but. The numbers, the percentages, the cold clinical certainty all screamed the truth, 100% match. The triplets, tiny, fragile, wriggling in their blankets, were his, the undeniable heirs to his legacy, to his empire, and to the love he had never allowed himself to fully acknowledge until this very moment. Gasps erupted across the room, a chorus of disbelief and astonishment as even the doctors, usually unflappable, stepped back, their sterile composure cracking at the weight of what had just been revealed. Chris's voice, soft but filled with a resonance that silenced all murmurs, broke through the tension. "She never even told me," he said, each word weighted with awe, shock, and a bittersweet pain, his eyes dark pools reflecting the weight of history, love, and a future suddenly made infinitely more complicated and beautiful. Vivian's knees buckled, and she collapsed to the floor with a muffled cry, mascara running down her cheeks like rivulets of guilt, disbelief, and fear as reality crashed over her like a tidal wave. The woman she had ridiculed, humiliated, and tormented, Elena, fragile yet unyielding, kind yet fierce, had not only survived impossible odds, but had given life to heirs who carried Chris's blood, his name, and his future in their very being. Chris knelt beside Elena's bed, careful, reverent, brushing damp strands of her hair from her pale, exhausted face, his fingers lingering for just a heartbeat longer than necessary, as though afraid the moment might vanish if he let go. "You kept my secret, even from yourself," he whispered, voice breaking, thick with emotion, awe and gratitude, his lips pressing briefly to her hand in a soft, reverent kiss that spoke more than words ever could. Elena's chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths, sweat-dampened hair clinging to her temple, her lips quivering as she stirred. Each tiny movement of victory over the darkness she had faced, and slowly, ever so slowly, her eyes fluttered open, catching Chris's gaze in a moment of fragile recognition. The triplets, tiny miracles wrapped in soft pastel blankets, were brought closer, one carefully resting against her chest, the warmth of new life radiating against her fragile skin. Her fingers brushed the soft down of a tiny head, and with a weak but radiant whisper she said, "They have your eyes." Chris's chest tightened, his heart threatening to burst, as emotion welled up in a flood he could not contain. Tears streaked his face as he bent closer, brushing his lips gently over hers before glancing down at the children, and with a voice trembling from raw intensity, he murmured, "And your soul." Elena's lips curved in a faint, tired smile, a glimmer of joy breaking through the exhaustion and pain, as the triplets murmured softly against her chest, their tiny movements a pulse of life, a heartbeat echoing hope and love in the sterile room. Vivian sat behind the curtain, a silent spectator to a drama she had once believed she controlled, sobbing quietly, every ounce of arrogance stripped away, replaced with a heavy, bitter awareness of her own cruelty and folly. The air was thick with the mingling sense of antiseptic, sweat, and something indefinably human, the raw, unfiltered presence of life, love, and survival. Chris's gaze hardened, eyes glinting with a steel that had been forged through desperation, fear, and an overwhelming love that now extended beyond Elena to the tiny beings cradled in her arms. "You'll never hurt her again," he whispered, voice low, cold and lethal, the kind of promise that could chill the air yet soothe the hearts of those he protected, a vow directed at Vivian, at the world, and at any force that dared threaten the fragile miracle lying before him. The room held its breath, the tension taut as every sound, Elena's shallow breaths, the soft murmur of the triplets, the distant hum of hospital machinery, became amplified in the intensity of the moment, each heartbeat a fragile echo of hope, survival, and unbreakable connection. Elena blinked slowly, consciousness returning in delicate waves, each flutter of her eyelids a victory, a testament to the indomitable spirit that had carried her through pain, through fear, through near death, and now into the embrace of love and family she had never dared to dream could be hers. Chris leaned closer, brushing a damp curl from her temple, whispering words that were promises, prayers, and declarations of love all at once. "I am here. I am not leaving. You are not alone. We are together. Always." The triplets stirred, tiny fingers curling around his hands, their soft, fragile warmth grounding him even as the world outside remained uncertain, a reminder that life was tenuous, beautiful, and infinitely precious. Vivian's cries behind the curtain grew weaker, faltering. Her arrogance evaporated completely as she recognized that the woman she had scorned had emerged victorious in a way that none of her cruelty could touch, and that Chris's unwavering presence had ensured that no force could undo what had been achieved here, in this sterile room filled with the scent of antiseptic and life. The DNA report, once a symbol of potential deception, now lay discarded on the floor, its authority nullified by the tangible reality of the triplets' cries, the soft rise and fall of Elena's chest, and the unshakable presence of a man who would protect them all at any cost. Chris pressed his forehead to Elena's gently, his lips brushing her hairline, and whispered, "You survived. And now nothing, no one, will ever take you from me or from them." The babies cooed softly, a fragile symphony of life, echoing against the tension and grief of the past hours, a quiet but profound celebration of survival, of love, of miracles that defied expectations, and just as the room seemed to exhale, as if the world itself recognized the victory, a sudden flicker of movement caught Chris's eye, a shadow shifting beyond the curtain, a subtle motion that suggested that the story was far from over, that secrets, threats, or truths still lingered, waiting to assert themselves, reminding everyone present that the world would not yield so easily, and that the next chapter of their lives was poised to begin in suspense. 6. The sterile scent of antiseptic lingered in the room, but now it was mixed with something warmer. Soft baby powder, faint traces of Chris's cologne, and the subtle, comforting smell of blankets and fresh linens that surrounded Elena as she slowly stirred in her hospital bed. The triplets, swaddled snugly in tiny pastel blankets, cooed and murmured in unison, their small fists curling and uncurling against the soft fabric, each tiny movement a heartbeat of life. Fragile yet powerful weeks had passed since the chaos of their birth. Yet the memories of the near-death hours still hung heavy in the room, in Chris's eyes, and even in Elena's body, which was slowly mending. Every scar, every stitch, every ache a reminder of the ordeal they had survived. Chris had become a constant presence, unyielding, unwavering, his silhouette almost permanent at her bedside, a guardian, a lover, and a father, all in one. He lifted a small bottle of formula with a careful hand, guiding it gently toward one of the baby's lips, his eyes soft and watchful as the child latched on, sucking with determination and tiny grunts of satisfaction. "You've done enough for the world," he whispered softly, his voice low, tinged with emotion as he brushed damp hair from Elena's temple. "Now let me take care of you." Elena's gaze softened as she watched him, heart swelling at the tenderness behind his dominance, the patience and love he poured into every action, every word, every glance, and for the first time in weeks she allowed herself to feel safe, to feel cherished, to feel loved completely. The triplets shifted in her lap, one letting out a tiny squeak, another stretching tiny arms upward, and Chris responded with a gentle, reassuring touch, smoothing blankets, adjusting tiny mittens, murmuring comforting words that only he and the children seemed to understand. Outside, the world remained chaotic, unaware of the miracle occurring behind these hospital doors, but Chris's vigilance allowed only warmth, safety, and care to enter. Vivian, of course, had not surrendered so easily. She arrived at the hospital with flowers in hand, a tentative, fragile smile on her face, attempting to breach the fortress of protection that Chris had erected. "Chris, I just wanted to—" she began, her words faltering under the weight of fear, guilt, and the realization that she had been rendered powerless. Chris blocked the door decisively, his posture rigid, cold, and unyielding. "Forgiveness is her choice," he said, voice low, ice beneath the warmth he reserved only for Elena and their children. Vivian's eyes widened, mascara streaking her cheeks, but she said nothing, retreating slowly with the flowers drooping in her hand, the realization of her helplessness settling like a stone in her stomach. Inside the room, Elena gently rocked their daughter, swaying slowly, her hands cradling the tiny life with awe and tender care. "I thought you hated me," she whispered softly, a question that trembled on her lips like the delicate flutter of a candle's flame. Chris smiled, leaning down to press a kiss against her temple, brushing strands of hair from her face as his voice resonated with quiet intensity. "I hated myself for letting you go." Their lips met in a soft, deliberate kiss, a gentle promise that no pain would ever touch them again, a connection that went beyond words, beyond fear, beyond the chaos that had plagued them just weeks before. For a moment, the hospital room existed only for them, filled with the faint sounds of the baby's murmurs, the soft hum of the machines, and the steady rhythm of two hearts reclaiming peace after trauma. But peace, Chris knew, was fragile. As he adjusted the blankets around the triplets, making sure each one was comfortable, a sudden chime sounded from the corner of the room, a phone alert, bright and insistent, cutting through the soft serenity like a warning bell. Elena froze, her heart pounding as she glimpsed the screen. A news alert flashed in bold, urgent letters. Someone had leaked her story to the media. The screen illuminated the room with the stark glare of headlines she had never sought, exposing her fragile new family to the relentless, judgmental eyes of the world. Panic gripped her chest, and she clutched the babies closer, their warmth a tenuous anchor against the tidal wave of fear that threatened to overwhelm her. "Chris, what do we do now?" she asked, voice trembling. Eyes wide with apprehension, the soft glow of monitors reflecting the panic she could not fully mask. Chris's jaw clenched, and for a heartbeat, silence fell between them like a thick, suffocating fog. Then he reached for the remote, turning the screen toward him, scanning the headlines with sharp eyes, his mind calculating, assessing, already planning the defense, the response, the protection of what mattered most. His fingers brushed Elena's hair again, a grounding touch, a silent promise that no matter the chaos outside, they were his, untouchable, and he would ensure that nothing, not even the invasive glare of the world, could harm them. The sound of camera flashes outside the window reached their ears, muffled but insistent, each click a reminder that the world would not let them rest, that curiosity and malice had already begun to circle, that fame and scrutiny had arrived uninvited at their sanctuary. Yet Chris remained steadfast, his presence a shield, unwavering, a fortress against intrusion, his gaze softening only when it met Elena's, conveying silently, "We face this together." Tiny cries from the triplets echoed in the room, their innocence contrasting starkly with the storm approaching from outside, their fragile bodies resting against the soft linens, unaware of the media frenzy waiting beyond the walls. Chris adjusted the positioning of the babies carefully, murmuring softly to them, reassuring in his tone, as if his words alone could shield them from the world. Elena's hands rested on his arm, fingers tightening with fear and trust simultaneously, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had been forged in blood, tears, and near tragedy. Vivian's shadow lurked outside, lingering at the door, watching the scene unfold, powerless, her own ambition thwarted, her presence a weak reminder of past cruelty that now held no weight against the fortress of love Chris had built around Elena and the children. The alert on the screen continued to blink, insistent, a modern-day warning signal that the world was awake, watching, waiting for scandal, for gossip, for intrusion. Yet in this room, Chris's presence countered the chaos with quiet, deadly determination. He whispered into Elena's hair, words only she and the babies could hear, "They will not touch us. Not you. Not them. Not ever." Her heartbeat slowly synchronized with his, fragile yet steady, a rhythm of survival, of defiance, of unbreakable love. The soft light of morning seeped through the blinds, casting patterns across the floor, reflecting off the small, innocent faces of the triplets, each a testament to life, resilience, and the unyielding force of parental devotion. And just as Elena allowed herself a tentative sense of relief, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the shadows outside the door caught Chris's attention. A flicker of movement, a whisper of intrigue, a subtle threat hinting that the challenges of protecting this fragile new family were far from over, and that the world, relentless and unyielding, had only just begun to circle closer. Cameras flashing, lenses peering, questions forming in whispers, waiting for the perfect opportunity to break through their sanctuary. The hospital room that had once been a sanctuary of fragile recovery now pulsed with tension, every corner vibrating with the echo of imminent chaos. Outside, a storm had gathered, one that was neither rain nor thunder, but the harsh glare of cameras, the insistent shouts of reporters, the relentless intrusion of a world that had suddenly discovered what they had tried to hide. The moment Elena's story leaked, it had spread like wildfire, blazing across every news outlet, social media feed and digital platform in a way that was impossible to ignore. On screens everywhere, in homes, offices, taxis and cafes, headlines screamed, "Secret wife of billionaire Chris Jordan found with triplets." The words danced across glowing screens like a declaration, a public verdict that demanded attention, and the world had delivered it in full force. Paparazzi had set up camp outside the hospital, lenses pointing, flashes ready, their voices rising in a relentless chorus, shouting questions, speculations, and accusations that hung in the air like a storm of needles. Every step, every movement of the hospital staff, every car that rolled by was under scrutiny, under observation, as the world tried to glimpse the woman they had only heard rumors of. Vivian, lurking in the background with her false composure, attempted to twist the narrative to her advantage, stepping forward with a fragile smile and carefully worded statements, trying to spin lies, to reshape public perception, but each word faltered under the glare of Chris's unstoppable presence. Chris, dressed immaculately, exuding the aura of control and dominance that had earned him the fear and respect of the city's elite, stepped forward, Elena's trembling hand clutched in his, a lifeline of reassurance and power. His posture was impeccable, his voice steady and commanding as he faced the swarm of reporters, the cameras flashing like miniature suns, their lenses capturing every detail, every reaction, every heartbeat of the unfolding drama. "She's not my secret. She's my strength, my wife, and the mother of my children," he declared, each word measured, deliberate, resonating through the press room and into the ears of a world that had waited to hear his response. The room fell into stunned silence. Even the reporters, trained to expect chaos and spectacle, felt the weight of his words press against them, the authority of his presence bending the room to his will. Chris drew Elena closer, his hand firm on her back, steadying her against the flood of attention, shielding her from the invasive lens of curiosity, while making a statement that was both personal and public. His lips pressed a gentle, protective kiss to her forehead, and the warmth of that gesture radiated through Elena, calming her fear, anchoring her trembling heart. "Mock her again," Chris said, voice sharp, eyes piercing straight at Vivian. "And you mock me." Vivian shrank under the intensity of his gaze, her arrogance and false confidence crumbling instantly, replaced by a raw awareness of power she had underestimated for far too long. Elena's eyes glistened with tears, fragile yet fierce, as she clung to Chris, feeling the protection and love in his embrace. It was more than security. It was an affirmation that she mattered, that she was cherished beyond measure, and that no force, no gossip, no malice, no past grudges could ever reach her while he was by her side. The reporters erupted once more, flashes strobing wildly, questions shouted into the cacophony of cameras. But Chris remained unmoved, a fortress of authority and devotion, his eyes never leaving Elena, his words a shield against the invading world. Elena's breathing steadied, the babies nestled safely in her arms, their tiny faces serene amidst the chaos, a stark contrast to the storm of media attention that raged just beyond the protective walls Chris had constructed. Yet the moment of triumph was not without tension. Behind the press room, in the shadowed corners of the world Chris had conquered, a figure stirred, someone who had long watched his life from a distance, someone whose influence and power rivaled his own, and whose intentions were anything but benign. The whispers of their presence traveled like icy fingers along the edges of the room, unnoticed by the reporters, but not by Chris, whose instincts had been honed over decades of battle, negotiation, and confrontation. A flicker in the crowd of cameras caught his attention, a subtle anomaly that did not belong, an unknown presence, a ripple in the orderly chaos. His gaze sharpened, calculating, already anticipating the move, the motive, the threat that lingered beyond the immediate glare of media spectacle. Alina sensed his sudden shift, leaning closer, resting her cheek against his chest, her voice trembling softly. "Chris, is someone watching?" His jaw tightened imperceptibly, a shadow crossing his handsome features. "Always," he murmured, lips brushing her hair. "But here, now, you are safe. We will face them together." The crowd of reporters surged forward instinctively, sensing the tension, their questions now more frantic, their flashes more insistent, yet Chris's presence absorbed it all, deflecting the chaos, holding Elena like the center of a storm that could not touch her. Vivian, desperate to regain relevance, attempted to push through the press line, her attempts weak and faltering, but Chris's assistant, a silent sentinel, intercepted her at the threshold, blocking her passage with an authority that left no room for argument. Elena's heart raced, her hands tightening on the babies, but Chris's calm, steady presence anchored her, his soft murmur against her temple a whispered vow, "I will not let anyone hurt you, not here, not ever." The flashes of cameras captured every expression, every movement, every tender gesture between them, immortalizing the bond, the love, and the protective fierceness Chris displayed. A love that radiated not just through words, but through unspoken actions, through presence, through a devotion that the world could see, yet could never truly penetrate. And as the press conference continued, as reporters shouted, cameras flashed, and the outside world erupted with curiosity and scandal, Chris's gaze swept the room once more, resting briefly on Vivian, the shadowed figures lurking beyond the immediate chaos, and finally on Elena, whose tear-streaked face reflected a mixture of fear, awe, and burgeoning strength. He held her closer, his arm wrapping around her protectively, and whispered once more, a promise and a warning. "The world may know us now, but they will never control us. Not you, not our children, not me." And yet, even in this apparent triumph, an unseen presence moved through the edges of the city, watching, waiting, a silent observer whose intentions promised that Elena's crowning as queen of Chris's empire would not go unchallenged, that shadows from Chris's past were stirring, and that the storm was far from over. The cliffhanger lingered in the very air they breathed. The world had found them, but something, someone, was coming that even Chris had not anticipated, and the next wave of chaos threatened to crash upon their fragile sanctuary, testing their love, their courage, and their bond as a family for the first time outside the walls of the Hospital 8. The city was alive with whispers, excitement, and anticipation, as the news of Chris and Elena's triumph over scandal and intrusion had spread like wildfire. Paparazzi had been pushed back, rumors quelled, and the chaos of the outside world now settled into a tense calm, all because of Chris's ironclad control and unwavering devotion. Yet even with the city watching, the threat of those who had once tried to defame or destabilize them lingered in the background, like shadows just beyond the bright lights. Chris, handsome and commanding, with his tailored suit pristine, his eyes dark and magnetic, had already begun taking steps to silence any remaining whispers of malice. The rival who had attempted to tarnish Elena's name now faced the wrath of a man who would not be crossed. Overnight, his company was paralyzed, contracts frozen, and every boardroom in his empire knew. Chris Jordan would allow no harm to touch the woman he loved. Elena, radiant in a flowing white gown, her long hair cascading in soft waves, held the hands of the triplets, their small fingers wrapped securely in hers. Their faces, innocent and trusting, reflected the light of the chandelier above, shimmering gold against the polished marble floor of the grand ballroom. Each step she took down the aisle was measured, deliberate, and yet carried the weight of the journey she had endured, the struggles, the pain, the near loss of life, and the triumph of survival and love. Chris stood at the end of the aisle, heart hammering in his chest, his gaze locked on Elena as though she were the only person in the room, the world, the universe. He felt the swell of emotion rise in him, pride, adoration, relief, and an all-consuming love that had grown and hardened through every trial they had faced together. The orchestra played a soft, enchanting melody, each note echoing through the golden hall, yet the sound barely registered in Chris's ears. He heard only the rhythm of Elena's heartbeat through the distance that separated them as she approached, step by step, radiant and beautiful, yet vulnerable in the perfection of her elegance. Cameras clicked and flashed, but Chris ignored the crowd, the press, the world. His focus was entirely on her. When she reached him, their eyes met, and the moment held the weight of every memory they had shared. The coffee in the cafe, the hospital struggle, the cries of the newborn triplets, the tears, the love, and the promise of forever. Chris took the microphone, his voice rich and steady, carrying across the ballroom and out into the world through live broadcast, yet intimate and reverent as it reached Elena. Years ago, he began, a faint smile tugging at his lips. She threw coffee in anger. Today, she fills my life with warmth. Elena laughed softly through tears, the sound clear and melodious, carrying relief, joy, and a sense of triumph over every hardship that had sought to define her. She looked up at him, eyes shimmering with emotion, and Chris lowered the microphone just slightly, pressing his lips to her temple in a soft, protective kiss. Millions watched, yet in that kiss, Elena felt only his love, his devotion, and the promise that no force could ever separate them again. Vivian stood at the back of the room, tears streaming freely now, mascara smudged across her pale cheeks. Her arrogance had crumbled, leaving only the raw awareness of past cruelty, guilt, and the realization that she had underestimated Elena, the woman she had spent years mocking. She whispered under her breath, voice trembling, "I don't deserve forgiveness." Yet Elena, glowing with grace and maturity, offered the mercy that only the truly strong can provide. "But I'll give it anyway," Elena replied, her voice carrying over the soft hum of the orchestra, a testament to the woman she had become, resilient, loving, and generous beyond measure. Chris lifted Elena's hand, brushing a soft kiss across her knuckles, his gaze devouring her as though she were the only woman alive, the only heart worth holding, the only soul worth cherishing. "To the world, you're my wife," he whispered, voice rich with emotion and certainty. "To me, you're my home." The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing through the golden hall, cameras flashing to capture every moment of love, triumph, and union. Elena's chest swelled with joy, tears streaming down her cheeks as she clutched the triplets close, each small hand gripping hers, each face radiant with trust and innocence. Chris turned his attention to them, smiling warmly as he adjusted the way each child was held, ensuring they felt safe, secure, and loved. The ceremony continued with every flourish befitting a grand wedding, yet the essence of the moment was intimate and personal, a family united by trials, strengthened by love, and celebrated by the world, yet untouchable by anyone who would seek to harm them. As the final vows were exchanged, Chris and Elena embraced, the world watching as they kissed, holding each other tightly, as though they could erase the past hardships simply through the strength of their love and presence. The triplets cooed softly, tiny arms reaching toward their parents, and Chris gently guided them into a group hug, the four of them entwined in a perfect fragile circle of family, love, and triumph. Vivian, observing silently, finally turned away, the full weight of her guilt pressing down, the realization that Elena had become untouchable and that Chris's love could not be undermined. The golden chandeliers sparkled above, reflecting on the polished floors, on the smiles, on the tears, and on the unity of a family that had survived, that had conquered, and that had risen above malice and cruelty. Every camera caught the emotion, every heart in the audience, both present and viewing remotely, was captured by the raw, real, and radiant love displayed between Chris, Elena, and their children. The music swelled, carrying a note of triumph, victory, and joy as the ceremony moved toward its conclusion. Yet even in that climax, a subtle, teasing hint of mischief flickered in the room, the tiniest of smiles curling on one of the triplets' lips, a small shadow of Chris's own secret, playful smirk. It was almost imperceptible, yet for those who knew him, a whisper of the future. A hint that destiny had more stories to tell, more laughter to bring, more adventures for this perfect, chosen family. The lights dimmed slowly, leaving golden reflections dancing across walls, mirrors, and crystal accents. As the applause faded into a hushed reverence for the moment's perfection, Chris and Elena stood hand in hand, surrounded by the triplets, feeling the weight of a world conquered, of enemies defeated, of love affirmed, and of a life that promised beauty, joy, and adventure beyond imagination. And as they looked into each other's eyes, a promise lingered silently between them, that whatever the world threw at them, whatever shadows remained, they would face it together, unbreakable, untouchable, and bound by a love that had been tested, proven, and immortalized in every glance, every kiss, every tear, and every heartbeat. The story that had begun with anger, fear, and near tragedy had transformed into one of redemption, passion, and everlasting love, sealing their place not just in society, but in the hearts of those who witnessed in awe the journey of a woman who had become a queen, a man who had become a protector, and a family that would forever endure. And in the very last moment, as the lights finally dimmed, the smallest of the triplets lifted their lips in that secret, mischievous smirk, echoing their father's, hinting that destiny had yet another story to tell. A new chapter waiting just beyond the glow of the ballroom, ready to continue the legacy of love, resilience, and unstoppable family strength. And that's how Elena, the woman her stepmom once mocked, became the proud wife of Chris Jordan, the most powerful man in the city and mother of his beautiful triplets. Her kindness defeated cruelty, her love silenced hate, and her strength turned pain into power. Vivian's regret came too late, but Elena's forgiveness made the ending shine even brighter. Remember, love doesn't always arrive with flowers. Sometimes it walks in when you're at your weakest and lifts you higher than ever before. If this story touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button, leave a heart in the comments for Elena's strength, and share it to remind someone that true love always finds its way back, even through pain, betrayal, and tears.